Guys, been listening to the discussion. It just sounds like you're reading the Iowa's obituary, giving a nice eulogy to this game before it begins. But, after watching Iowa's offense for, 6 games or so, I really don't blame you.
I think the lack of scoring is so jarring, and not just because we cover Ohio State. I think you cover anybody, and you cover Iowa, and the lack of touchdowns is jarring. And you return Iowa returns a starting quarterback from last year, a guy that I believe lost the job as well. But you expect more than what they've gotten, and I don't know. Are you seeing the effort from the coaches to change things, or is this just the same thing every single week?
It's interesting because I think when you look at last year, I argued you should have fired a position coach or two last season. I mean, look, Iowa won 10 games last year, but Iowa was 121st in total offense. They were 114th in completion percentage. The big difference I see between last year's Iowa team and this year's Iowa team offensively, last year was just much more opportunistic. I mean, Iowa had 25 interceptions. Iowa offense really didn't have to drive the ball down the field because Torrey Taylor was so good. You had Charlie Jones back there that set you up for some nice things. But I went back and looked at just some of the scoring stuff from last year. Iowa had 24 field goals, 4 defensive touchdowns, and 2 special teams touchdowns. Iowa's offense had 29 touchdowns last year. So they were outscored field goals, defensive touchdowns, and special teams touchdowns than the offense. So, I think it's interesting. I think Iowa continues to double down. I mean, we asked Brian Ferentz about, recruiting mobile quarterbacks. Iowa has a couple good up-and-comers in the next couple of recruiting classes, assuming Iowa can hold on to them. But he called it backyard football when a play gets broken down and timing gets disrupted. And I'm like, if I'm any defensive coordinator around the country, I'm licking my chops because you're telling me all I got to do is disrupt timing on a route and the play is dead and you're admitting defeat. Okay. So, I think we're definitely going to see some overturn this offseason, no matter what happens, I think, at this point. And I'm going to compare it to, I don't know if you guys remember back in 2014, Iowa went 4-8, a lot of heat around Kirk Ferentz, a lot of people wanted him fired, made some changes schematically, did some different things, put CJ Beathard starting quarterback. They go 12-0 in the regular season. But it's going to be a very interesting offseason. And, this doesn't have the vibe whatsoever of the 2017 Iowa-Ohio State game.
He's got to have an occasional conversation with his old buddy, Nick Saban. Nick Saban doesn't like playing football like this either, but it slapped him in the face at some point, and he said, I got to get with the times. I don't like it, but let's upgrade the offense, and let's do it the way everyone else is trending towards, and let's win.
Yeah, my question is, we know that the Iowa defense is very capable. Where are they better suited in terms of trying to attack the Ohio State offense? In terms of, is it against the run? Is it against the pass? I mean, what is it that the Iowa defense does that could try and take Ohio State out of its rhythm?
I think Iowa's defensive line is much better this year. I think Iowa's defensive line last year was so young, but they didn't really have that pure sort of pass rusher. Yes, they had Joe Evans, Lucas Van Ness, who I think is going to be a future top 2-round NFL draft pick. I mean, he's just built like he belongs to the NFL. But this season, I think Iowa has a little bit better of a pass rush. They can get in the backfield. I think, for example, Travion Henderson's probably the most underrated player in the country. I argued that at the beginning of the season because when you look at this Ohio State team, he's the 4th or 5th name that comes up now between Mayan Williams, Marvin Harrison Jr., Jackson Smith-Njigba, and CJ Stroud. So I think Iowa's going to obviously prioritize stopping the run. They're going to try to make CJ Stroud throw, and they're just going to trust Phil Parker's secondary. And Iowa's defense this season, guys, has done everything but put the ball in the end zone. I mean, you knew when Iowa had that fumble return against Illinois called back, everybody knew the game was over. And I think the Iowa defense knew that as well because that would have secured them the game based on how the defense was playing. So, I think Iowa's going to come out and just try to stop the run. They're going to force CJ Stroud to, scramble around, play some backyard football. But, I think another interesting part of this is as good as Iowa's secondary is, talent matters at the end of the day in these type of matchups. I mean, Riley Moss is a stellar corner. I think he's cost himself some money this season. I think he maybe should have left last season. But Kayvon Merriweather is a nice Big Ten safety. I think he's going to at least get a couple training camp opportunities. Guys, here's a 2-star basketball player coming out of high school, and he's going to be defending the son of an NFL Hall of Fame wide receiver. Like that's the difference that we're talking about here. So again, I think Iowa's going to really prioritize slowing down Williams and Henderson, and then they're going to throw in maybe a blitz or two to really try to make CJ Stroud uncomfortable. But, at the end of the day, it's very tough for me to imagine how Iowa gets CJ Stroud and this Ohio State team uncomfortable. And like you mentioned, Ryan Day is treating this game like a scar back in 2017. I mean, his guys are going to be extra motivated. And I think that this whole season, not to bring up a Michigan thing, but it is basically a revenge season, a revenge tour for this Ohio State team.
Got a super chat coming in from our guy, Ryan. Appreciate you being here, Ryan. Thank you so much for the contribution. Could this be the game where the Ohio State defense gets a pile of turnovers, or does Iowa not take any chances? So that could be answered from both sides here.
Yeah, I think Iowa just really hasn't taken a lot of chances. I think that this is going to be a very important game for Luke Lachey. I think he's going to play well, obviously, his father being Jim Lachey. But Luke really had a great game against Michigan, scored his first career touchdown. And again, I think he's going to be a future NFL tight end. And, listening to Ohio State yesterday, it really seems like their first priority is to lock down those Iowa tight ends. Sam Laporta, I still think, has had some drop issues this season. But ultimately, I think Kirk Ferentz made it very clear yesterday. He's very worried about this Ohio State defensive line. So if Iowa wants to take chances, I don't even know if they'll have the time to be able to develop taking those sort of chances. Because if you look at Iowa's offensive line, look, as bad as Spencer Petras has been, I think that there are so many issues beyond Spencer Petras. I think he's taken the brunt of the criticism, maybe rightfully so. But this Iowa offensive line right now, guys, they're starting 4 sophomores and a freshman. I think they take that next step next year. I think they're going to be very good. But there's 2 entire recruiting classes that aren't contributing on the offensive line right now. So as good as Iowa is at developing, they still have to develop it. And you look at, they still have talent. Connor Colby, who's a 4-star coming out. Logan Jones is a former All-American. I felt bad for him because he's being compared to Tyler Linderbaum, going from defense to offensive line, wearing the same number, both being Iowa kids. Talk about unrealistic expectations from year one. So to answer the question, I don't think Iowa's really going to be able to take those chances. I think Iowa's do what Iowa does, and that's not move the football. They're not going to come out in a 5-wide set. They're not going to throw in a wildcat. And as Brian Ferentz might be digging deep, but even Kirk and Brian have both said, you really can't install new schematics in the middle of the season. So right now it's basically try to improve and improve as quickly as possible. And again, I was going into the game, driven to win, but I think Iowa fans just want to see any sign of life, just somehow resuscitate this Iowa offense to do anything.
It's just too bad they had no signs that the offense wasn't going to be very good this year. But you're right. The offensive line, because it's being it's a developmental position at a developmental program. And when the offensive line is so young and hasn't had time you should be 4th year and 5th year guys. And now with COVID, you should have some 6th year guys there as well. And to not have that while everybody else does puts Iowa even further behind. And I think you've seen some of that this year as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, kind of similar to Tony. Yeah, you can't install new schematics or whatever, but what gave them the illusion that the schematics they installed during fall camp were going to work?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? But, I do think that when you look at on paper, I think a couple of things strike me. One, the timing of Charlie Jones' departure probably should have been a bigger warning sign, because if people don't know, he went through Iowa spring camp. Like, he went through spring training. He was expected to be a big part of this team, but reasonably, at least from my perspective, you couldn't prioritize giving Charlie Jones more opportunities over Arlen Bruce and Keegan Johnson just based on what we've seen on the field. But Iowa failed to go in the portal to land playmakers. And that's something where, Mark, you brought up earlier, there's a lot of differences between Nick Saban and Kirk Ferentz, don't get me wrong. But the difference between an all-time great coach and a really good coach is one adapts with the times. And that's exactly what Nick Saban's done at Alabama. Kirk Ferentz hasn't done that. He's shown new wrinkles here and there. But when you get, I think there was a span of 10 games where Iowa threw for 1 touchdown. 1 touchdown, guys. And 47% of FBS quarterbacks are transfers. And Iowa's not going in the portal for a quarterback. And they're not trying to replace proven wide receivers, or at least some targets on the field. You know, it should have raised the red flags a little bit more, but you look at the talent that Iowa did return, you thought they would at least take a step forward. And I mean, from my account, Iowa not winning the Big Ten West, it's a failure of the season in my book.
There seems to be a philosophy that we recruit players and then we choose the best player for that position. And in this new world of the transfer portal, no, we don't look beyond our walls because we recruited these guys and we're going to stay loyal to them. And there's a certain sense of that I can take a lot of respect for this program, but stability on one end, stubbornness on the other. There needs to be a balance there. They seem to be going far in one direction toward the stubbornness, and there were 20 plus transfer quarterbacks this year, like capable, better than Spencer Petras quarterbacks who left programs and went to other programs that you would consider to be on Iowa's level or maybe not on Iowa's level that were there.
I do think that this season, if Kirk's going to change at all, he's going to hit the portal. And I know there's going to be a couple names that they're going to monitor. I don't want to release them just to be fair to the student athlete. If they potentially enter the portal, I don't think it's fair to either program. But there's going to be a couple names that I think will enter the portal, that I'm hearing will enter the portal, that Iowa's definitely going to kick the tires around. And again, and I think you guys brought up earlier when you talk about trying to recruit to a system. I mean, Iowa had one of the best running backs in the country committed in Kendrick Raphael, the top 350 kid by 24/7 Sports, 4-star speedster, looked like he'd fit in great. But then after Iowa's all-time historically bad offensive start, he decommitted, and who could really blame him? That's why I'm saying there has to be turnover this year, because you're not only going to struggle getting kids from high school. There's transfers that, who wants to come play a part of the system right now? There's no identity. I mean, you look at all-time great Iowa teams, they know what they're about. And I think when you look at this Iowa offense, there's nothing they can really hang their hat on right now.
Yeah, I think it's really big of you to not say that Bryce Young and Jordan Addison are transferring to Iowa.
Well, good point about the identity. We know Wisconsin's struggling right now, but they also have one of the best backs in the nation in Braylon Allen.
Yep.
When Wisconsin's being Wisconsin, which they have been, except for like 3 seasons in the last 30, people still make fun of Wisconsin. They can't throw it, and they're in the pro set and all that. But they have an effective offense when they're good. It's functional. They have an offensive line. I think most college football fans across the country, if you ask them about Iowa and they're really not paying attention, but they just have this stereotype of Iowa, they believe that Iowa's Wisconsin. Iowa hasn't had a good running game since when?
Probably Akram Wadley, LaShawn Daniels. They each had a 1,000-yard season. But yeah, I'd agree with that. Here's the thing. I think Tyler Goodson ability-wise was there. I also don't think Tyler Goodson's skill set was really fit in with Iowa's scheme. He wasn't between the tackles guy. He was a guy where if you lined him out in the slot, you got him out in the open field, he could shake and bake and make some things happen. But that's why I think an Ohio native, Caleb Johnson, I think has an extremely bright future at Iowa if Iowa can figure out its offensive line, because I haven't seen a guy with that size and speed combination since, I hate to throw the name out there because it's so easy, with Sean Green. I
think what Kirk Ferentz needs to do is go find his Kenneth Walker III and then figure out how he's going to spend those $95 million.
Still one of the craziest contracts I've ever seen. Maybe besides Russell Wilson in Denver, might be one of the worst contracts.
Well, Russell Wilson's done a few things to earn that contract.
I agree with you on that.
You're not going to earn it going forward. That's usually the issue in sports.
Yep.
You don't earn it going forward. You earn it for what you did in the past. But not to backtrack on the quarterback situation, because I probably should have brought this up in the midst of the QB discussion, but it's not like Kirk Ferentz has always had this style of quarterback, this type of quarterback. His biggest and initial success was with Brad Banks.
Yep.
And then the couple guys, Drew Tate and others after him, were not to that extent, but mobile quarterbacks. You would think that, okay, he's had his 3 top 10 teams early in his tenure there at Iowa with mobile quarterbacks.
I think Iowa's offense doesn't even really need a mobile quarterback, but they need somebody that can maneuver a pocket. I think that's the thing that stunned me the most about Petras, because Petras at times I feel like can stand in there and take a hit. He's shown flashes, but there's just nowhere near the consistency that Iowa needs. Now, I think they need a quarterback that can maneuver the pocket, maybe scramble outside if they have to, just to extend a play. But Iowa ultimately has to change the route trees. They have to land wide receivers, and they have to, I don't want to say doing a complete overhaul, but they have to modernize the offense. And I think if you talk about one coach in the country that's more in their ways for good or for bad, it's probably Kirk Ferentz.
Are we saying triple option at Iowa? Maybe they just try and change everything up there, just go triple option.
Well, at this point, people want Cooper DeJean at quarterback because he was going to be offered a quarterback at Virginia when he was coming out of high school.
And just one of my last things is you mentioned the route tree and the simplification of it, and it's a simple offense, and then you knock the timing off, and it's like, now you've already limited what you can do, and then if the timing's not there, when it's hard to have the timing there when everybody knows that this is probably what's coming. It's just it's a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of the offense isn't going to be there because the design isn't, and everything needs to go perfectly for the offense to work at all.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of where we're at. And the crazy part too is I've never seen an offense that is self-described as so complex. I do believe that there's a lot of responsibility in Iowa's quarterbacks in terms of, pre-snap reads, calling things out, looking for blitzes, etc. But you're telling me that Iowa is one of the only programs in the country where you couldn't have a first-year 5-star quarterback come in there and immediately just play. Like, it's going to take 2 or 3 years to learn the playbook. From my vantage point, and I'm sure all of yours, the playbook's about 4 plays long. So, I mean, what makes it so complex? And that's my big thing is Iowa has to find a way to keep that complexity, but simplify enough to move the football, because it's gotten to the point where it's a major win if Iowa moves the ball 5 yards down the field. It's as crazy as Ohio State throwing a 30-yard pass. Like, that's how rare it is at this point for Iowa.
We touched on this before you jumped on, David. Keeping a locker room happy is a difficult thing regardless, just based on playing time, even if you're fairly successful. But the imbalance between offensive success and defensive success, and this defense carrying the offense, does the media ever question the defensive players about just, not that they're going to get anything out of them, but in regards to, what's it like giving up 9 points to Illinois and you lose 9-6? And this happens over and over and over and over.
It's almost to the point where we're almost gaslighting the defense guys, because they're not going to go out there and throw the offense under the bus, because we've asked them and the response we're getting is, well, you know what? If we would have stopped the run better on first down, we would have given up 3 points. We should have pitched a shutout. And I'm like, guys, like I understand, like I respect the answer, but come on. Like, at what point are they just going to sit there and be like, we're doing our job? Like, somebody has to find a way to move the football. And yeah, I mean, we've asked them, but that's the response we're getting. I mean, even Phil Parker has come out and basically said that too. And they'll say, we're all together on this. We don't care if people believe us or not. But guys, you've been around college football. You've been around locker rooms enough. Good and well, there's plenty of tension in that locker room right now because that offense can't move the football.
I remember asking Malik Hooker after the 31-0 Clemson loss, like in the playoffs, it's like, you guys, defensively, you played well enough to win, don't you think? And he's like, yeah, it's not about that. But you could tell it was about that. It was like he'd given up 24 points to Clemson and not scoring anything. And that's and that was just one game. I couldn't imagine week after week, like, you give up 17 points to Ohio State and you're like, well, we've done better than anybody has done since, that Clemson game, and we have no shot to win.
David, when was the last time the Iowa offense won a game? Didn't get it in the defense's way, but actually won the game themselves?
That's an interesting question. And I was going to bring this up as a stat too. I went back and looked at all that because a question I posed on my podcast is, you look around the country, when's the last time an Iowa quarterback has put the brunt on their shoulders and said, I'm going to go win that game? And you have to go all the way back to Nate Stanley. When he led the drive against Nebraska, they had the game-winning field goal kick, but he drove them down the field. TJ Hawkinson caught a clutch 4th down during that drive that kept it going. But, off just top of my head, maybe it's just bias, but I mean, Ohio State, 5 touchdowns to the air. Nate Stanley. And Nate Stanley, I think people realize they should have appreciated Nate Stanley more after what they've watched for the past couple of seasons. But go back to the start of the 2017 season. Iowa is 39-3 when they score 21 or more points. 39-3, 21 or more. Not offensive points, total points. And I know this is such a minute point, but if his name's Brian Smith, is he still employed at Iowa? Brian Williams, is he still employed at Iowa? But I can't think off the top of my head that a game that Iowa's offense went out there and won under Petrus. Smackdown against Maryland last year when they put up 55.
When they got 7 turnovers, was it 7? I think
it was
at least 5. I think it was.
Yeah. Well, the wide receiver got hurt for the rest of the season on that kickoff. Iowa got it. And then I think they picked off 3 passes. Spencer had 3 touchdowns and 2 on the ground as well, which were QB sneaks from 1 yard out. Let's not get crazy.
Well, we want to make sure that Kevin gets his time, and he's got to go here. Kevin, just remind everyone where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter, Kevin_Noon. You can find me at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And, of course, you can find all of our great YouTube videos at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
We give Tony all the difficult questions. So, David, if you can just be patient here for a second. Brian is asking, because we honor all the Super Chats, do you fire Ryan Day when he loses to Michigan?
How bad's the loss? No, you don't fire Ryan Day if they lose to Michigan. This is a top 5 Michigan team, and it's a rivalry game, and losses happen. If he loses that, he would move to 1-2 against Michigan, which didn't used to be as bad as it is now. But no, you don't fire him. You need to. It would take. I don't know how many losses, Mark, you think it would take to fire Ryan Day, because they're going to be winning 10 games along with those 1 losses to Michigan.
Yeah, if the scenario, Tony, is that the entire season is the typical Ohio State season, except the Michigan game, and he's like going 10-2, 11-1, 10-2, 11-1. I guess if he loses like a 5th consecutive, I don't know, 4 or 5 straight, maybe. How do you get?
But he's going to the playoffs every year, you know.
At that point,
you can't fire a guy for going to the playoffs.
Yeah, at that point,
Well, but that becomes another thing where it's like you keep going to the playoffs, but you don't win in the playoffs. How many playoff losses is a fireable offense? And now we're getting into like kooky talk, basically.
Exactly. It is kooky talk to even bring up, but Super Chat contribution there. David, we could go in so many directions. I'll just throw out a few other things that aren't necessarily questions, but for things for you to respond to. I've heard Kirk Ferentz over the offseason. It seems like every time he's challenged with offensive difficulties, his response is, we won 10 games last year. It's the overall success of the team. Like if you've got a corporation and 2 of the 3 units you have are exceptional, elite at what they do, and the other one is just a disaster, you just ignore it and say, well, we're still making some money, so why improve that unit? That seems to be the defense.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought that up, because I was the one who asked Kirk that after the Illinois game, and I knew right when he said it that way that was going to be a very big talking point for the next several weeks. But, you know, that's not raising banners. And you have to look at, Kirk's a big picture guy, but like you said, you take a step back. They won 10 games in spite of that offense last year. Like there was nothing groundbreaking about that offense last year. I think Keegan Johnson did some nice things. Sam Laporta, I think, is a top 5 tight end in the country. He still has major drop issues that he's going to have to correct. Yeah, Tyler Goodson, who, you know, is a good running back. The scheme didn't fit him. But that defense was, you know, historically great with 25 interceptions. Jack Campbell's a top 3 linebacker in the country. Torrey Taylor, just the Australian college football connection is just incredible. I love hearing about it. But there were so many other factors that contributed to 10 wins. So, and I understand he was fresh off the emotional loss, frustrating loss to Illinois. And he said, yeah, our offense took a step back. But if you're going to go back to since 2015, we've had a lot of success since, you know, like you said, they won 10 games last year. Okay, well, guess what? It's modern college football. Times change. People care about this season. They appreciate the 10-win season. And let's not act like the 10-win season ended on a high note. You got curb stomped by Michigan in the Big Ten championship. And then the Kentucky game, they were missing a lot of their key players, and Kentucky still went out there and won. So you lose back-to-back games during a 10-4 season. If just to put it blunt, guys, if everybody on this offensive staff is retained after this year, it's borderline coaching malpractice. I mean, there has to be jobs, there has to be accountability. But I understand Iowa extending Kirk Ferentz. I think he's earned it, like you mentioned earlier, Mark. You built up that sort of repertoire over the course of a career. But just because you earn it doesn't mean you have to stop making good decisions for the football team. Like, somebody has to go. And at what point do we question Gary Barta not overstepping Kirk? Because the nepotism rule at Iowa, Gary Barta is Brian Ferentz's direct boss. And Gary said, we have full faith in him. And he's basically leaving it to Kirk. So it's a very complex situation, I think, to put it short.
Anything else, Tony?
Just the record that you mentioned when they scored 21 points or more, you would think that maybe let's try to score. Let's score 21 points more often. And you know what? I bet our record scoring 27 points a game is even better than it would be scoring 21. And has anybody asked him how many touchdowns has last year's record scored this year?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing. I didn't get a chance to follow up with Kirk on that, but you could tell I think there was a moment in that answer where he kind of tried to backtrack and he kind of knew he messed up, but the damage is already done at that point. And, again, I think Iowa fans, for the most part, they've been a pretty mellow fan base, but this season, just because of the expectation, look, the Big Ten West sucks. Yep. This is the worst division in the history of college football in terms of who's going to win. Like, Illinois is Illinois is probably the only good football team in the Big Ten West. I think Purdue's okay. Minnesota should be better because they got off to a hot start. Wisconsin, Iowa are tanking. Nebraska is still Nebraska. But Illinois is going to win it, and Iowa returned 15 stars from last year's 10-win team. And right now, I don't know if they make a bowl game. I would probably bet against it at this point.
I do have an argument for the ACC Coastal, but point well taken. Absolutely
fair.
Right.
That's fair.
And the last thing I have, again, more of a statement than a question that you can respond to. During the entire offseason, we do an Iowa show every Tuesday. Would love to have you on sometime, David. But, logically, rationale tells you if they're 123 in offense out of 131, and with the players they have, you almost could I could almost call the plays and you could just, okay, dive right, dive left, play action, and produce more offense, you would think. But then I also looked at, you lose the best center in the country, you lose Tyrone Tracy, you lose Charlie Jones. Who did they add? And then maybe they are going to be worse. I made that statement a few times thinking, well, they won't be, but they lost better personnel than they've gained. So, and here we are.
I think Iowa, it was a roster mismanagement by Iowa. I do think that losing Keegan Johnson, for him not playing all year, I think that's been a major blow to the offense because I think Keegan's upside is very, very high. He showed big flashes of that last season as well. But Sam Laporte, I thought, would continue to take a step forward. Nico Reganey being hurt for the first 4 weeks, played through injury for the last couple weeks as he gets by 100%. I mean, the first 2 weeks this season, Iowa had one scholarship receiver available. Like, at what point do you just say, we probably got to add some more guys? And again, but if you talk about trying to add guys, it's not a fun offense to recruit to right now. And I think a big part of the missing identity for Iowa, they've gone to more rollouts and bootlegs. You have a non-mobile quarterback and you're running this. And maybe that's to give him more time because the offensive line can't hold up. So I understand that argument. But what made those, I don't want to say great Iowa offenses, but like the average Iowa offense that could produce some big plays, it was run the ball, good offensive line, and the ability to sell the play action. It seems like Iowa just has not been able to sell any sort of play action, maybe since Nate Stanley. And I mean, you look at the play against Michigan State in the Big Ten title game back in, I think, 2015. There were certain plays where you can point to in Iowa. Last year, the Penn State game, that was still a bit more of a rollout, but Iowa's gotten away from that play action. They don't take any chances down the field. Right now, Iowa's offense plays to get in position to punt, and they play not to lose the game. They don't play to win, and I think that's what's really cost Iowa.
David, if you don't mind taking on this super chat, we answer all the super chats and appreciate this. Jordan, again, if Iowa keeps it within 14 points of Ohio State, they should just give Kirk the Coach of the Year award now instead of waiting till season end. So whatever you want to do with that.
Hey, I think Ryan Day is going to have a pretty tough argument because I think this Ohio State team should be expecting a national title. I think they have the most talented wide receiver corps in the history of college football. I think you throw in LSU with Burrow there. I think you can throw in Alabama there, obviously, but I'm telling you that Ohio, the fact that you lose Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, and you talk about, the backups might be just as good, if not better. That's a scary product. So, I think the only way Iowa keeps it within any sort of that is it's going to have a similar start to the 2017 game. And that's why I said earlier, if Iowa wants to make a game out of it, they have to have a momentum snatching play from the very, very start. And, I hate to say it, Iowa might have to score on the defense or special teams because we've seen Iowa get, turning the ball, get turnovers, get in the red zone, get on the 4-yard line, and they still can't put the ball in the end zone. There was an alarming stat. I want to find it, and I want to give credit. It was Scott Docterman from The Athletic wrote about it today, and it was about Iowa's red zone offense specifically. And this is, again, probably the most alarming stat I've seen. Iowa quarterbacks have attempted 15 passes from inside the opponent's 10-yard line in the last 14 games dating back to 2021. There are 7 completions and 1 touchdown. The lone touchdown was Luke Lachey's in the last 10 seconds against Michigan. That's the only touchdown pass. So Iowa tries to run the ball, and then they get scared about, was Spencer going to throw an interception, and then they kick a field goal. Like I said, it's not winning football.
Last statement out of me, and then Tony can close us out with any final thoughts that he has on this matchup or anything else related, would be that if anybody believes that I can only speak for myself, piling on Kirk Ferentz, this is a guy that I still think, to take David's comments, is a really, really good football coach. There's no question about that. He's built a tremendous program there. At one point, I thought he was a great coach. I no longer think he's a great coach. I think he's a really good coach because there's just been too much ineptitude on one side of the ball for me to rate him that high anymore. But so just a tremendous coach that could go off into the sunset, has accomplished a lot of good things and, continue the Hayden Fry legacy. But it's a bit extreme at this point. Tony, anything else?
I think it's what's the old saying? Heroes stay around long enough to become the villain, that sort of thing. And I think you're starting to see something along those lines with Kirk Ferentz. And at some point, you have to recognize that what you're doing isn't working. It's not good enough. And if you don't want to change it, let somebody else do it.